Welcome to this month's drawing tutorial. This month I'm going to show you how to draw a crying eye. So a teardrop, but also what happens to the eye when it cries is it gets extra lubricated, and so it looks a lot more shiny and you have a lot more reflection to deal with. But let's go ahead and get started by just drawing an eye. Start your eye with a rectangle. In the lower corner is going to be the corner of your eye. The upper frame is going to be the upper boundary of the upper eyelid, and the lower side will be the lower boundary. So our eye itself is going to be an oval that comes in and goes out like this, in and down. Don't forget about the bottom eyelid also. Erase the frame of your rectangle. Now, a rectangle is really just very helpful for getting the proportions of the eye down. And then you can start to clean up the interior lines as well. So I do that by erasing my sketch line and then going back in and redrawing with a little bit more confidence. The second line you draw should be smoother and more continuous. The tear itself is going to go under here like it's spilling out of the eye that is overflowing with water. So just make sure that you leave room for that. Then just quickly draw your iris. I'll have this eye looking straight forward. The pupil will be about here. There's going to be some reddish membrane in the corners of the eye, especially the interior corner. So I can just indicate that with a little line here. And then don't forget to draw the shapes of your highlights. And remember, on a wet eye, those highlights are going to be very large because it's very, very wet. And the next step is going to be to start adding the tone. Now, before we add the tone, we need to consider how important the highlights are and how important it is that those are very, very, very precise. So I'm going to get that Frisket film out. Frisket film, remember, is a stencil that you can cut, and it has a sticky back. So all you do is trace the highlight shape on the shiny side of the Frisket, and once you have those shapes traced, just cut them out. And then before you stick it down, just make sure that your paper is free of any marks, and just stick it in place and tamp it down. I'll do that with all of my highlight shapes and come back to you. Now the biscuit is in place, and I'm going to start adding tone to the outside of the eye. So I'm just going to use my charcoal pencil on the side, and I'm going to add a nice even tone. My pencil is barely grazing over the top of the paper, and that is going to help me to get a nice, easy blended tone. If you dig in or you make heavy lines, it's harder to blend your tone nice and even. You're always going to have streaks. This initial skin tone is going to go over everything, and I'm going to bring that skin tone right down to the tear because the tear needs to have a highlight, and so in order for the highlight to stand out, it's going to need to be lighter than the background. While I'm at it, I'll also do a base tone in the iris. That's the colored part of the eye. And I can do that going right over the top of the Frisket film. And then I'm going to go into the pupil as well. Now I'm going to blend with my chamois cloth and make that a lot cleaner. So I just wrap the chamois around my finger, and then I use circle strokes, and I blend that charcoal into a nice base smooth skin tone. Because it's charcoal and because I just skipped over the top, this base tone blends out and becomes very, very light. So then with my dirty chamois cloth, now that I've used it, I can add that light tone in the white of the eye, and that way those shadows in the whites of the eye will remain very, very subtle and clean. Now I need to go back into the eye and bring out those lines again. And in places like the upper eyelid, there are going to be parts of the line that are thick and dark and parts that are very light. So start light, 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 and then where it's supposed to be darker, press down more. and then lighten up when you get to the other edge. It's like a rainbow. And then do the same thing at the top of the eyeball. This is going to get a lot darker and thicker because this is where our eyelashes are going to be visible. For now, I'm just going to add kind of a scribble of dark, but later on we'll be adding some more lashes to this area. And remember too that you need to have lost edges and harsh linear edges. So the lost edges are going to be just suggestions of where one surface meets another and kind of melts together. Like the lower eyelid is a good example of that. And then there are also really definite edges in the eye, like the eyelashes and the outer rim of the iris. But even there you're going to have parts that are darker than others. I'm going to go back into the pupil and darken that up, and then add the tone again, this time a lot darker. Then add some spokes in the iris, kind of jaggedy back and forth like this. Some areas are dark and some are light. So down here where there's a lot of highlights, my spokes are probably going to be lighter as well. Then up here in the darker part of the eye where the eyelashes are casting a shadow, my spokes are going to be closer together and appear darker. Then I want there to be a little bit more tone on the upper eyelid and some more tone on the lower eyelid as well. And I'll go back in with that chamois cloth and re-blend. But in this phase especially, it's just blend, add tone, blend, add tone, blend, add tone. And as you progress in the drawing and you need your lines to stay more definite, you're going to add tone, add tone, add tone, and then blend with smaller and smaller implements. Let me show you what I mean here. So I've just blended with my chamois cloth wrapped around my finger. Now I'm going to, you guessed it, add some more tone, including in the whites of the eyes, in the corner of the eyes, so that it looks like this is a ball, because that is what the eyeball is. And I'll start to add a little bit more of the tone of the upper eyelashes. But then this time when I blend, I'm going to use a stomp. A stomp is just rolled paper, and they come in a lot of different sizes. So use the largest one that you can for the area. No matter what you're blending, always go with the largest. And that's going to ensure the smoothest, most even tone for you. And then I'm going to use some circle strokes in the pupil and in other places where I'm blending to keep that tone even more smooth, and also blend in the direction of the spokes that you put down in the iris. Blend the outside corner so that everything looks smooth and organic and flowing. Now the key to a realistic eye is contrast. So make sure that you have plenty of darks and plenty of highlights, both, before you can even move on to the details. You need to have contrasts in the dark lashes and the dark pupil up against the whites of the eye and the highlights of the eye. Now I'll go in again and darken up those darkest places. And this time I'm also going to do more work on the lines of the lashes. When you're adding the lashes, don't add a lot of individual little hairs. Okay, work on having a large block of darkness and then adding a few lashes that come off separate from the clump. We don't see every lash. We see things as shapes, and you need to simplify as much as possible so that we can get the information more easily. And make sure there's enough contrast between the corners and the normal whites of the eye. So let me blend this up to the next level, and then I'm going to come back and take off that frisket film. Okay, this is looking great, so I'm going to go ahead and carefully remove my frisket film. The trick is to get that first edge up, and you can do that with a razor blade very carefully, or some sharp scissors, or a palette knife. Really anything can work. You just get it under a corner there and lift off the tape, and you see that nice clean white light preserved. Once you have those cleaned up, then you can go back in and add a little bit of detail, soften them up so that it looks like a highlight on the eye instead of a big white block. So just carefully add some detail like this, and then soften and blend with the Stomp or Tortillon. And I'll soften the edges just a bit so that they don't look too harsh and cut. And you can even add some details in the highlights, like there's something reflected in the eye. And then use your eraser and make some reflected light by just pulling through some more highlights. So here at the top of the eye, I'm going to mash my kneaded eraser into a blade and pull out a little bit of a highlight that was too small and faint to protect with masking fluid. I might see a few little pullouts in the actual lashes themselves too. Just choose a place where it's already a little bit lighter and emphasize it. Because especially when there's tears, there are going to be wet spots on the lashes as well. Then in the whites of the eyes, just go right over the top of everything, and it's going to help it look like this is water pooling in the eye. And just having a few little areas highlighted on the surface of the eye are really going to do wonders as far as increasing the realism and making it look like this is really a wet eye. Alright, I'm satisfied with the surface eye now, so let's get to work on the tear. The tear is actually quite simple to do. It's all about the reflection and the highlight. So here, let me show you. You're going to start by just drawing a little teardrop shape, just like this, or however long or big you want it to be. I'll strengthen some parts of the line with my charcoal pencil. And then I'm going to add some tone to the left side, but I'm going to keep the tone fairly light. And don't go all the way to the end at the bottom, so leave a little white space at the bottom and on the right hand side. Next, you're going to blend that tone. Use little circle strokes with your Stomp. Keep a bright highlight on the left. Then I'm going to add a shadow being cast by the tear. And I'm just going to do that with the Stomp now that I've already used it. Brighten up the highlight. Clean up the center so it looks like the water is reflecting on the face. And then if needed, you can blend that tone out a little bit more, possibly going a little bit closer to the edge. And I'm going to add a little bit more contrast and then blend a little bit more and just push and pull back and forth that way until your eye sees a tear. Then up here, I imagine that the light is catching the tear as it comes out of the eye, so I'm going to add a couple of more reflections. And if you can't get your whites bright enough, you can even go in with a white pencil and brighten those up even more. So I can leave it there. That is an eye with a very wet surface and one teardrop. So that concludes this month's drawing tutorial, and I thank you so much for watching.